So the entire world is watching as Putin and the rest of Russia has invaded the country of Ukraine. Now, to be honest, I didn't think he was going to do it. I thought that he was going to come in to the break-off provinces and defend them from the neo-Nazis in the Ukrainian government and society. That is what I thought would happen. I didn't think Putin would go to the point of invading the entire country, going all the way to Kiev, but apparently that seems to be the case. This is what he has chosen to do. And I'm kind of blown away by this. I was wrong on this one. And I didn't think he'd be crazy enough to do it, but apparently he is. But what's really funny is the people who have said to me, I told you so. Except here's the problem. You didn't know so. You literally just went along with whatever hyperbole and scaremongering the Western media went with. So what are you even talking about? You didn't know anything or analyze anything. You just did whatever the media told you. So don't act like you knew. You didn't know anything. That's pretty laughable. Something to note is that essentially Russia won the war in like 5-6 hours. That they came in, a lot of the Ukrainian military just laid down their arms and surrendered. Many of those on the border just completely just let Russian forces come into the country, particularly from Belarus, without even putting up much of a fight. The Ukrop anti-air defense was taken down in about no time whatsoever. The Ukrainian military really didn't stand a chance at all in this situation. And I think that's something that Putin very clearly knew, and something the president of Ukraine very well knew, which was why all the way up until the 11th hour he was saying that diplomacy was possible and wanted to do everything to avoid war, because he knew he couldn't win. Now, it's interesting to note that Ukraine fell faster than Baghdad did, faster than Iraq did during Desert Storm. So this is not a world record for the shortest war ever, which is something you can look up on Wikipedia. I think it's something like 45 minutes or something. But it's pretty damn quick. Now, Russia, of course, is going to suffer a great deal of consequences as a result of this. Basically, all of the advanced first world countries have placed sanctions on Russia to punish not just Putin, but the leaders, ministers of many countries, ministers of many cabinets, people in high positions of power, people in very large businesses, basically anything that they can do without actually resorting to some kind of physical violence. And I think that's the key here. By doing this, and NATO not doing anything about it, has sent a very clear message. Now, the purpose of the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization has always been to try to contain and threaten the Soviet Union. Of course, you'd wonder what NATO was still doing existing decades after the Soviet Union didn't. Obviously, it was placed there to still be a threat to Russia in general, to forward U.S. interests inside the region, particularly the Baltic states. But here's the thing. For weeks now, the U.S. has been saying that NATO will invade Russia or attack Russia if Russia does go into Ukraine, which Russia has now done. But NATO, so far, is nowhere to be found. It appears that the United States doesn't really want, or didn't really want, a war with Russia at all. Politically, it's a nightmare. Economically, it might be a lot worse. I mean, we know the military-industrial complex and how it props up the U.S. economy, etc. But there are limits to everything. One must consider the amount of resources that the United States has now, and much of it being freed up after having left Afghanistan after that failure. Although many of them still claim that the U.S. won the war in Afghanistan, even though they didn't. So it's a question. What kind of message is being sent by not going in and fighting Russia? It sends one very clear, powerful message. NATO's not going to do anything. What lesson have we learned from this? We have learned that NATO may in fact be a paper tiger. For all of its bluster, for all of its endless spending on weapons and machines of death, it didn't do the very thing that it was created to do, or at least its second life was intended to do, and that was attack Russia. Or defend from Russia, etc., what have you. Now, every country in Europe, particularly the Baltic states, now know NATO is toothless. It's not actually going to do anything, although that's what it's supposed to do. This is now going to be a very simple, clear message that NATO is not the power that it claimed to be, or maybe even once was. That what they say doesn't mean anything, even to their own allies. NATO's not going to be there, even if they claim that they are. Now, Biden may turn around later and say, okay, it's time for war. Maybe. I doubt it. But you never know. I think the message has already been sent. So, given all of this, and of course the mainstream media is not going to talk about how NATO's been undermined, etc. What do you think they're talking about right now? It's like about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning as I'm recording this. And I was going by MSNBC, maybe about 45 minutes, an hour ago. I was watching Morning Joe. What do you think they were talking about? What do you think is like the most important thing attached to this conflict? Well, naturally, it's Israel. Israel, this was what Micah and Joe Scarborough felt was the really important angle that needed to be pushed in this case, was how Israel was going to react to this and what this means for Israel. Which is really weird because this has nothing to do with Israel whatsoever. Now, I think the greater context might have been, what does this mean for U.S. allies? Well, what if now China decided to say, well, Taiwan, you're coming home? And China went in and took it. Well, we saw last time when it was Ukraine and Russia, the U.S. didn't do anything. But for some reason, they hyper-focused on Israel because Israel's been our longest, strongest ally, and to quote Joe Scarborough, we've been the staunchest ally. I've been supporting them since 1948, 47, whatever. But it's like kind of really weird that this says, and to help Israel, our greatest allies, is, okay, well, you're committing genocide against Palestinians. Don't think that somehow because of this that Israel is now in a great, terrible position, because Russia's very happy to do a lot of trade with Israel. And China is very happy to do a ton of trade with Israel, despite being, a socialist country, allegedly, and nothing says international solidarity with oppressed peoples like funding the people who are committing genocide against them. But I digress. I just thought it was so strange how they put so much energy into talking about Israel on a European issue. Like, the invasion of Ukraine really doesn't have anything to do with Israel itself. But for some reason, they hyper-focused on that. And congratulations, because that's the kind of nonsense that gives fuel to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Good job. But listening to the rhetoric, all of this rhetoric about how the Russia is violating a sovereign country and the world needs to stand up and tell them that's not okay. And while that may or may not be true, the amount of hypocrisy is staggering. Think about that. The United States is telling another country that they're wrong for occupying another one. With a panel of 6 people to talk about the issue, nobody mentioned the elephant in the room, which would be the U.S. continued illegal occupation of Iraq, illegal occupation of Syria, their continued occupation of many countries around the world, and that Russia's meddling in the political affairs of other countries. I'm sorry, was this the United States who just said that? Okay, because it sounded like the United States was criticizing someone for interfering in the politics of another country, considering that's literally the purpose of the existence of the CIA. And, while it is kind of, it's a logical fallacy to point that out, that Russia's invasion is okay because the U.S. does it all the time. And I don't think that's fair. If an invasion is wrong, an invasion is wrong. But it's that building pressure in your head whenever the United States condemns someone for doing something that they've been doing for a century, even longer, and are currently doing right now. The point here that I'm trying to make is that the US and NATO are not to be trusted. They are, for every criticism that you could have of Russia and Putin, which there would be a fair amount of criticisms to make, they are astronomically, the US is astronomically worse. And it is nothing but total projection coming from the US. The US is not to be trusted. To be perfectly honest, my actual position is that Ukraine should probably not have been invaded by Russia. I fully support the military defense of the 2 break-off provinces. The ethnic Russian areas which voted freely and democratically to leave Ukraine, they should be able to leave. And if the Russian military is asked to help them maintain their independence from Ukraine, then by all means, it's free and fair. That is to say that I am not on Russia's side. I am on the side of the people of Donbass, etc., who have freely and fairly chosen to leave. And that is their right. And that countries in the world who would come to their defense and to assist them are right in doing so. Time will tell whether or not invading all of Ukraine was a good idea. It cannot be denied that there's a great deal of fascism inside of Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, the neo-Nazi militias, etc. But I'm wondering if this was really the right thing to do. Obviously, bash the fash is always good, but is it okay when another imperialist country does it? And I know a lot of people might point that out with regards to my position on Syria. To which I would answer that despite my criticisms of Russia, despite my criticisms of Putin, Bashar al-Assad is the real, legitimate leader of Syria. And if they want Russian assistance, that is their choice. The issue with the Kurds, however, allying with the United States is completely different. Because the Kurds are essentially helping the United States steal oil from the country, and even then, the U.S. has now abandoned them, which I don't know at what point you would have to realize that you can't trust the United States. I mean, it's not like they've done this more than once, the Kurds, before. And that the very simple answer would be a federated state. Give a large piece of territory, give some territory to Kurds inside of Syria, and make it part of a federal government, and you would have peace. You would have all the cultural, religious autonomy that the Kurds deserve, and they do deserve to have that. They would have the right to write a fair amount of laws regarding their own society and the way that they wanted to live. And they'd be part of a larger federated state. And everybody could live in peace. In fact, my criticism of Assad would be for not offering that to begin with. I would also criticize Russia for not pressuring Assad into doing that. So I just wanted to note the difference, because a lot of people like to point out hypocrisy rather than understanding the nuance of two positions. It's hard to justify not overthrowing neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and in the end, I believe that getting rid of Nazis will overall be best. But we have to keep in mind that Russia is an imperialist country. It's a capitalist imperialist country. And that its motives are not wholly altruistic as we would have if, say, the Soviet Union did this. Now, despite protestations from many ginger journalists, Russia is not great, untouchable, wonderful, altruistic in its being. It's a capitalist imperialist power, like many other countries. Not exactly the same. It has their own dimensions, their own aspects to it. But in the end, who do we really want in Ukraine? I would say let Ukraine run itself. But that's not who's running Ukraine right now. It's neo-Nazis backed by the West. And that is right to destroy. I think maybe the point I'm trying to make here is that there really is no ideal solution in this situation. There is what we would like things to be. We would like how they are. We would like how we want this to turn out, and how things can possibly turn out in this situation. Because we don't have a Soviet Union anymore. We don't have a socialist China anymore, despite protestations to the contrary. So we have to make do with what it is that we have. And at least we can hold on to one fundamental principle. Bash the fash. And at least that, in this situation, we are going to get. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.